Okay, so far so good. Okay, can you give me a thumbs up, Kieran, if you can see the slide in presentation view? Perfect, thank you kindly. All right, so before kicking off the session today, I'd just like to draw our attention to the fact that we are coming together online. So we're coming together from diverse lands today, and different places have different traditions for acknowledging traditional custodians of those lands. So in Australia, it's common to do an acknowledgement of country. And if you have a common acknowledgement of country that you might do where you live, please do feel free to include that in the Zoom chat here. But I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who have been custodians of these unceded lands for many thousands of years. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders past and present. And I'd like to thank them for the care they have given to this country for thousands of years, and it is care from which I now benefit myself. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Just be aware that the session today is being recorded. This is going to be a presentation in the first half of the session, and then quite an interactive session in the second half. So feel free to speak up and participate in whatever way is comfortable for you, which also includes, not speaking up as well, if that's the most comfortable thing for you. So the community meeting notes have been dropped periodically in the chat. Hopefully you can access them. And if you can't, just drop a message in chat and we'll pop the link in again. If you would like to tweet us, you can tag the Research Data Alliance, and you can use our new hashtag RDASDDI. And do feel free to sign in on the attendance sheet in the meeting notes. So more information about the interest group is located in that hyperlink, which you can't actually click on the screen. So I'll drop that link into chat when I'm finished this introduction. But I'm not going to go into detail about that now, because Kieran's going to do that in the next little bit of our session together today. Instead, I'd like to take a few minutes for us to get to know each other. So I'm going to close out of this. I'm going to drop a link into chat. Eventually, when my windows arrange themselves. Okay, so hopefully this link will work for you. So at that link, you should be able to respond and tell us where you are joining from. If that poll doesn't open for you, Kieran, can you tell me if that poll is opening for you?
Yeah, that works for me.
Perfect. It should work for all then. So Australian, excellent. Germany, excellent. France. Australia's still in the lead, I see. France is a close second. Ireland, nice. Usually Ireland, yeah. Korea, nice. Great, so we've got a bit of a smattering of attendees. This is fantastic. All right, next question, so that we can get to know each other. Can you tell us a little bit about what your role is? So in your day-to-day job, what kinds of there we go. So in your day-to-day, like, what is your day-to-day job title? Data manager, project manager, research, yeah.
From my side, it's always in the first question.
I think there's a new one on the chat. It doesn't move by itself.
Yes, there's a new link in the chat. Sorry, Ramon. Progressing a sequence of polls was beyond my technical abilities. Can you access that second link in chat, Ramon? Does it work for you?
Yes.
Nice. Not surprisingly, in the word cloud, data is far and away the winner. Should have thought that one through in a bit more detail. But it looks like we've got a good representation of different roles here today, which is excellent. All right, and the very last thing before I hand to Kieran, who's going to give us a bit more context about the interest group, is just a quick poll on whether or not there's anything in particular that you're hoping to get out of the session today, anything that you'd like to get out of the session today. So that's the third link I've just dropped in chat. And it's okay if you don't have a response to this one, but we thought we'd just ask. Just the most appealing parallel session. Hey, good enough reason for me. Inspiration. Well, you know, we'll do our best. You should have thought about the soundtrack, Kieran. What were we thinking? Yeah, better ideas to convince people about data sharing. Yeah. Yep, I'd like to know what the group's been up to. That's great. And get to know people. Fantastic. Excellent. Actually, that's very informative. That's very helpful. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. Okay, we're going to step away from the poll activity now. And just a quick little bit of orientation. So you can see here on the screen now the session agenda for today. So I'm going to hand over to Kieran, who's going to introduce the, give some context and background to the interest group. Oopsies. Okay, great. Then we're going to have an invited talk from Joanne, so we're really looking forward to that. And then we'll be commencing the working part of the session, which we'll be talking about the survey development that we've been working on for the last several months. All right, so that's enough from me. I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Kieran.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah. Let's see if we get the technology working. Can everyone see that? It's coming through. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to give a quick run through about what social dynamics of data interoperability is and an introduction to this interest group. So if we think about the data, we've gone on a journey of many years. Over the last 10, 15 years, we've had a strong focus on making data more discoverable and accessible. Yet after all that time, we're still, while we made great progress over the last many years, much of it is still hard to discover and access and use. And we're still faced with lots of challenges on making it discoverable and accessible. The data is increasingly living in these complex ecosystems that consist of systems, multiple organizations and institutions, people, various funding bodies, etc. So interoperability is a key thing in there. And these data supply chains can have a mix of formal and informal arrangement on how everything is done. So if you think about it, the data sits in the context of the technology. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about the interoperability of that. But the technology and the data also doesn't sit alone. It's in the context of social and institutional and economic concerns that are surrounding that. So over the last many years, we've spent a lot of time around that interoperability of data and how to make different data from different places interoperable. We've had a lot of focus on that. We've got lots of working groups thinking through that. We've also equally worked through the challenges of how you make technology interoperable. We've got standards, we've got frameworks, we've got ways of thinking and best practice guides and so on. But when we come to looking at how the social constructs around it, that part is solely lacking in that. But it also is really key to enabling that interoperability between the technology and the data. Because if you don't get the different organizations able to work together, then that interoperability becomes, making the technology between them interoperable is very hard to do. And if the economic conditions or the funding conditions aren't right, then similarly, it's very difficult. Or if the people don't trust each other in the different parts of the supply chain, then it gets really, really hard to do. So that's the premise of this, and that's what we mean by the social dynamics of data interoperability. What do we need to have in that green section that allows us, enables that the technology and the data to interoperate? Now, if you looked around, you see that this is really a key challenge that gets mentioned in many places. But unfortunately, there hasn't been as much focus on working through this in a systematic way. And that's where this group origin is, because back in, back in plenary 16, we had a birds of a feather session saying, see this challenge, what we do about it. So out of that came this interest group. I put this one here because I'm starting to see increasingly that with the thinking that we're on this third wave of the open data, and that it's more about the purposeful sharing of data, and that requires a stronger collaboration between the data holders, the data users, and the different partners in there than we've had in the past. Again, highlighting that the need for the organizations and the people and their social aspects to be much more coherent and having ways of dealing with that in some sort of systematic way. So again, it's about that multidisciplinary approach. So you have the technology and looking at the social aspects and the institutional aspects that all go in, and what are the patterns that emerge for that to be able to make the maximum out of the data that we're talking about. And the focus on this group is that social and the institutional aspects that enable that to happen. So the interest group has three key focuses. One is to identify what those institutional and economic and individual aspects are that increase the friction for sharing and interoperability of information, and what those are that can reduce that. The second goal is to start to compile this corpus of knowledge of around this topic that allows the practitioners to go and reference and start to use as we go around doing our work. And the third goal is to try and identify a set of use cases that case studies that you can have applied that knowledge as examples and as a proof of concept, I guess, of how this can come together. So towards that, the group has established two resources. One is a Zenodo library and another Zotero library. So the material that's coming out of this interest group are being captured in those two, which and eventually we'll want to curate it a bit more and get more material in there, but that's the formation of that corpus of knowledge. So they briefly mentioned that the interest group started out back in plenary 13 from a birds of a feather session. For the next number of plenaries and years, there was a charter put together. COVID kind of got in the way a little bit as well. But it's been having regular meetings, and we've been discussing various topics around this, and then we find that it's a very broad topic, and it's kind of like a little bit like a fractal problem where you start to dig into one and you see more and more complexity emerge in there. But a few, or two plenaries ago, we wanted to focus in on this one because while we're having really good discussions, we weren't feeling that we weren't really progressing our thinking. So we focused in around saying, what are the top 10 things that we can do around a specific topic, and we'll get back to that in the second half of it. And we're coming towards a point where we're looking at building a survey to start to think about tapping into the broad knowledge that's there within RDA and using that to start to compile some outputs. So that's a very brief history of the interest group and what it's about. I might pause very briefly for any questions before we go to the next session. Are there any questions on the chat? I can't see the chat, Crystal. So
okay, nothing's come through in the chat, Kieran.
All right, in which case we might move on to the next session. So we got a presentation from Joanne Yeomans about her experience at the University of Leiden. So on building trust and to make fair data. Joanne, did you want to take over? Just sharing. There we go.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Kieran. I'll just get my screen up in a second, but hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you are. Thanks very much, Crystal and Kieran, for inviting me to speak today. I joined the session at the last plenary because I was interested in this topic. My role at Leiden is in the data management team in the central services, so we're based in the library, my interest in this, we have a team of, there's just 4 of us, so it's not a big team, but we all have different kind of niche interests within that team. So a couple of people I work with are a bit more technical than me, and my priorities tend to lie in the community building, the networking, and the training, and really I'm the people person, if you like. So the social dynamics of how we get more fair data and encourage people to make their data fair are interesting for me. So that's how I came to be attending this session and interested in this topic. So I'll do a screen share because I have some slides. And let's just check. Are you seeing my slides, Kieran? Give me a thumbs up if we've got the right place. Okay, good. So yeah, Kieran approached me and asked me if I would say something about trust. And I can't say I'm an expert on trust and what that is exactly. But when I started to think about it, what trust meant, I think it is very strongly connected with the community, because a lot of the trust comes down to the people behind the activities that are happening. So when we talk about community building, what we're doing is trying to build the trust between people. But it's not only about people, I think. So what I want to do is just go through a little bit what I understand by trust building, and then a little bit about how I would structure my thinking about Leiden and whether we have the trust that we need to be able to make fair data. So there's sharing data, which of course many people are doing, but really making fair data is a bit of a step beyond what most people are doing at the moment. And we are trying to push things forward at Leiden in that area. And so, yeah, we also get stuck. And so thinking about whether we have the trust there to be able to move forward was actually quite useful for me to do. So when I was thinking about how we make fair data, I thought it is a bit like getting researchers to climb a mountain. So a bit of an analogy here with climbing a mountain. So if you want to encourage someone to climb a mountain, then you want to know, has someone else done this before? Is it safe to do? Can I do it? And then it can seem very daunting at first, perhaps, but once you've actually made a start and started planning, things become a bit easier. You don't necessarily need to reach the top of a mountain every time. Maybe there are bases that you can reach and build upon previous work. But if you have done it before, it starts to become easier. And of course, you need suitable, reliable equipment for climbing mountains or for producing fair data, and you may need help or support from others, ideally an expert or guide who will help you or at least train you on how to do it. And I think we can all agree, once you get to the top, you want to celebrate, throw your hands in the air, come back down and tell others that you did it and that you're really proud. So I think this analogy works quite well for producing fair data. I hope you recognise some of these things. So what encourages people to climb a mountain? For me, I think it's a clear expectation of which mountain should we be climbing and when should we climb it. But we don't just write that down on a piece of paper. We need to actually make sure that people know what the expectations are as well. And that's actually, I think, sometimes a missing link, that the expectations aren't necessarily communicated very well. But once people know what's expected, then they need to know, do I have the equipment I need, the tools available? Is there someone who's going to help me? Can I have some training from ideally someone who knows what they're doing, some kind of experts? And if I do it, what do I get from that? And if I don't do it, what happens? Yeah, it's a bit scary. So what happens if I fail? And perhaps they need to say, can you tell me how someone else did it? And so all these things can encourage people to climb, and they ensure that they have the trust that they're doing the right thing, doing what's expected, doing it in the way that it's perhaps expected, or trust that they're not doing something stupid. They have trust in the people and the equipment or tools, and they trust that it will be worth the effort at the end, because yeah, there's a lot to learn, it takes time, so they want to know it's really going to be worth it. And having that trust also implies that there is a risk that things won't go according to plan. So just taking this out of the mountain analogy, but looking at fair data, what does this actually mean? Well, if we talk about clear expectations, I think having a policy, for example, or what might be called a protocol, really step-by-step instructions about how to make fair data, that you communicate this information, that you have awareness campaigns, perhaps meetings with decision makers, and that there are processes in place to guide people along the way. When it comes to equipment, that you have obviously the hardware, the software that you need, or infrastructure for not just the sharing of data, but of course the collection, storage, the sharing and the archiving. And that there are people there to support them during the process. So that's data stewards, perhaps working closely with the researchers, or peer support, or possibly experts that help many different people. So how much time you can give to them can vary, but some kind of data steward working closely with them. And if we think about experts, perhaps those are the people who train at the beginning, or consultants who are not there all the time, but can be there if there's a problem, and that researchers know that they can contact these people. When we think about rewards, we might think about funding success, we might think about champions, fair data champions. We might be able to demonstrate increased impact. We might have celebrations at the institution to recognise the efforts that people have put in. And we're also thinking about supporting failure by the kind of environment that you create. So perhaps thinking about, rather than launching something to big fanfares, talking about pilots, which allow for the possibility of failure, I think, and embracing failure as a learning experience. So trying to create an environment where failure isn't a problem, but a good thing that we can all learn from. And when we think of examples of other successes, I think we need successful pilots, case studies, perhaps we might have events to demonstrate and share best practice. So yeah, blog posts, all kinds of ways that we might share the success of others to demonstrate it can be done, to demonstrate it how it can be done, and perhaps to demonstrate it's not always fully successful, but we're working on it. So how does this apply at Leiden? So Leiden University is a very old university in the Netherlands. It has 7 faculties, so we really cover all subjects, just about, I think, that you can think of in a university. And we have about 1,000 research staff. I think we have something like 25,000 students. So we're quite a large university. And because of the spread of subjects that we cover, you can imagine we have lots of RDM challenges, especially I'm sure many of you are aware of social and behavioral sciences, psychology, often research with people, children, people with medical problems perhaps, and of course the university medical, the hospital, the medical centre also, you can imagine, has similar kinds of challenges when it comes to RDM. But for us, also the governance and global affairs faculty in The Hague, perhaps you're aware we have the European Palace of Justice, we have the Court of Human Rights, and we have a lot of international organisations like Interpol headquartered there, and a lot of our researchers are working with them on highly sensitive issues connected with terrorism and international crime. So that presents for us many challenges when it comes to data management as well. We're very lucky in the Netherlands that we have a national support network for open science, and it's very strong in the Netherlands. I'm so pleased that we have this, because I think it makes, in other countries there are challenges because you're really on your own. I'm aware of that, but in the Netherlands we have a very strong national infrastructure and movement supporting open science. The government's very supportive, the funders are very supportive of open science, and so and we're a country that's small enough to be able to network with each other very easily, and so I have to thank Carol Leuben for this image that's been around for a few years now, but I think it still represents the situation in the Netherlands, that we're in this movement from science 1.0 to science 2.0, where we're working on open access, we're working on fair data, and also citizen science where that is appropriate. And underpinning that movement, we're working nationally to improve skills, to improve the rewards, and to look into the metrics and how we can move forwards towards a science 2.0 kind of era, where these things are more established and become the norm. So we have that as a kind of background, and then at Leiden we're doing a lot of giving a lot of thought as to how we build up the support within the university. And we have this central office where I work, the Centre for Digital Scholarship, which is based in the university libraries, plural because we have many libraries across the university. And that comprises 3 full-time equivalents in the data management team, but we also have a use of digital data team, who are 2 people at the moment who are much more software engineers, if you like. So they really work with people on their data. but we collaborate with them, and they are part of our FAIR data projects together. So we're in the central services, and we have this colourful diagram at the bottom. I know the text is in Dutch and it's a little bit fuzzy, but basically down the left hand side we have the faculties, and across the top we have the different areas of research support, and the first column there is the data management support. And what we're working towards is that we have data management support in each of the faculties, as well as on the bottom line we have the central support services, and that each of these vertical columns, so some of the others are ethics, subsidy advice, funding advice. So each of these columns works together as an area of research support. And then within each faculty, they also collaborate together as a team on a horizontal kind of network. And we're calling the people who work in the faculties, who literally, if they go into the office, they are going into the faculties to sit close to the researchers, and they're there as first line support for researchers. And then the second line support, which is what I am and my team, we sit in central services, wherever that is, whether that's the management officers or the library like we are. And they are supporting the first line staff, but also doing university-wide support. So trying to find the similarities, the overlaps, the common challenges, and bringing those together so that we can collaborate to find solutions for those. Now, these faculty data management staff are not fully in place yet. So we've had some funding, and we have approximately 10 in place at the moment. Some are faculty level, others are what we call institutes, which are, maybe some of you call them departments below the faculties. Yeah, so there's a bit of variation, and we have about 10 in place at the moment, but there is active recruitment going on. So that number is increasing month by month at the moment. But at the moment, we won't have one per subject per institute. For the moment, there's not enough funding, but obviously if this is successful, if data management is recognised as being a successful activity, we hope that that number will increase. And our IT support, obviously we have IT support at the university, but we also have a national body called SURF, who is responsible for national cooperation and therefore supplies some of the big infrastructure and tools that we need in data management. So going back to how we encourage fair data at Leiden University, the specifics of what we do, we, in order to have clear expectations for people, we have some data management regulations, and I've made a link in my slides, so you can reach my slides from the shared collaboration notes and have a look at our regulations. They date back, I think, to 2016, I think was the original version of them. And we've just been through a revision process, which takes some diplomacy, of course, and a little bit of, yeah, the regulations, if we wrote them ourselves alone, perhaps wouldn't look exactly like this. So there's some compromises, but it's important to have a process where you include everyone, and then you get buy-in and support for the regulations. So this comes to a little bit on to communicating expectations, that by involving people in discussions, you already start to get a kind of communication of those expectations and a buy-in, an agreement that this is what we should do. So we've developed these regulations, and they now refer to FAIR data. So our original version didn't, because the acronym hadn't been created then, but now it clearly mentions FAIR data. And we've done some other little revisions as well to bring them up to date. They are a framework for the university. So they don't go into a huge amount of detail about how to make the data fair, or how to, they're broader than fair data, of course, how to manage data. They're meant to apply to all the faculties, so they're generic and high level. And the idea is that under that, each faculty develops a protocol to elaborate the regulations and explain in far more detail exactly which software people should be using, where they should place their data, where who they should call on, who is responsible. So really go into the details of how to do that. And that's partly why we're appointing data stewards at the moment. Some of those are more policy orientated than practical hands-on data stewards, and they are literally, well, not literally at the moment because it's the middle of the night, but they are day to day at the moment working on the development of these protocols. So we expect to have some kind of draft versions by the end of this year, and hopefully by next year some of those are finalized in their first form, but we're aware they are going to be living protocols. So when it comes to whether we are communicating those expectations, I would say I think our awareness among researchers is fairly low. So the regulations are on the website. They may have been involved in some meetings, consultation meetings with the regulations or with the protocol development that's going on, but it's fairly low level at the moment, because we don't see the point of promoting the regulations when the protocols aren't there, because again, they're high ranging, they mean nothing to researchers really. They don't tell them what they have to do and when, and that's what they want to know. So I expect once we have the faculty protocols, then we can really start with a big awareness campaign. So next year we will start to think about that and work on that. When it comes to available equipment and tools, I would say on the scale of things we're doing pretty well, of course. We're in Europe, we have money, we have tools, but we're still missing a lot, I would say. And when it comes to tools, it's also a little bit about the people, because it's very hard to recruit IT support staff in the Netherlands. The pay at the university is nowhere near what people would get in industry. So we're often short on staff. And we do know of some software and hardware developments that we need, but we don't necessarily have this number of staff we need to be able to put those in place. And when we have solutions, sometimes we are missing more detailed guidance on how to use them. And that's partly our fault, let's not say fault, but we know this is also on us as data management support, but with priorities as they are, there's only so much we can do as well. So I would say this is an area where we are a little bit lacking. We could do more, we would like to do more, and we have some pilots going on, but they're very slow moving pilots, and there's a long way to go. And to be fair, the solutions don't necessarily even exist in all cases. So when we're looking at really fair data, and especially when we're dealing with sensitive data, the solutions are not yet ready nationally, internationally, I think, for what we need necessarily. So this is an area where we're not doing quite so well, perhaps, but it's an area we're aware of and we are working on. Do we have the people there to support them? Well, as I mentioned, we have data stewards through seed funding, some from the national funders. So we hope to establish these positions as more permanent positions and increase the number significantly in future. I don't know if you're aware of Barend Mons's predictions of how many staff are needed to help with data support. I think we'd be looking at several hundred data stewards if we had the numbers he would like to see at the university. I think if we could get to 20 or 30, then we would be really super happy. So we're working on this as well. And to bring all these people together, we now have this data management network, which I say it brings sort of the vertical column, if you remember my rainbow table, brings the vertical column of people together, and so that we can communicate with each other, not just the data stewards, but people in the faculties who are also very heavily involved in data management because of the projects they're working on, or because of their interest. Then when it comes to the expertise, of course, the data stewards are experts. They are more faculty orientated specialists, but in central support, we have say some quite technical people. That central support's been in place for a number of years now and has been delivering training and consultation direct to the researchers. And that's an area that we're starting to hand over a little bit to the data stewards. And that will free up some more time for working on this software development, infrastructure development. And we recognise that there's a lot more we could do in terms of providing information about how to look after your data and development of our own skills within that central service. We've started working on a number of FAIR data pilots. Well, I was going to say we've started this year, but it started a few years ago, and this is where the trust comes in. I think it's been difficult getting researchers who have enough knowledge, have enough data, and have the time and willingness to work with us. So we're trying to develop some pilots. I think we have some people. We're kind of getting the expertise in place, we're getting the time, and so we're going to start leading some pilots and see where that takes us. When it comes to rewards, again, this is an area I would say there's little in place at the moment. Dutch funders are very focused on FAIR data, so at least the funders are talking about FAIR data and expecting FAIR data from people, but at the moment, I don't feel they've really closed the loop and are really checking that that happens. Although I believe from speaking to them that they are working on that as well. So at some point in the future, they will start checking that people are making their data fair. Now, I'm not sure what that will look like exactly, but at least the will is there for them to really make sure that researchers understand the expectations from their funding agency. And there's a national rewards and recognition programme discussing how we can change rewards and recognitions to reflect open science. And we have people at the university working on that as well. So we hope that that also will include some kind of recognition of producing FAIR data. And when it comes to examples, now again, at the beginning I mentioned, you know, of course, many people are sharing data in some way. And so we have examples of people sharing data, but when it really comes to FAIR data, really good examples, I would say we're really lacking, not just Leiden examples, but any examples of FAIR data. And so there are some, because of the funding and the COVID program of funding that's been going on in the Netherlands, there are now some examples of FAIR data in medical sciences. But of course, if you're working in humanities or psychology with very sensitive data, these examples don't necessarily help you to understand what you're working towards. So I would say we haven't really got enough examples to show people what we mean by FAIR data and how that's happened, explain to people how they can make their data fair. So that's where we are in Leiden, I would say. And I made this little graph to sort of visualize where I think we are. So there's a caveat how we are doing, but this is my opinion. It's not a scientific analysis, but it was just a kind of feel for where I think we are now and where we might be a year or two in the future. So the expectations, I said we have regulations, but we need the protocols. So we're working on that, and we hope that to be really good a couple of years from now. With the communication, very low at the moment because we haven't done any communication. But again, within a couple of years, I hope everyone understands the expectations, or the researchers especially. When it comes to equipment, we have some things in place. We're working on pilots for a few other things, but still a bit low. And that I hope will become a priority once we've communicated expectations and started working on the staffing levels. So the support people, again, a little bit low, but we're working on that, and we hope that we will increase the number of people across the university quite significantly in the next couple of years. But I still think even then we'll be half what we really need. The same with the expertise. We have the people there. We're doing a bit better there because they're more established. It would be nicer to have a few more people with expertise and to develop the expertise that we have, especially when it comes to fair, hands-on fair data. So we're working with the Go Fair office in Leiden quite closely, but developing the knowledge beyond 1 or 2 people is a challenge. But we're working on that. The rewards, I think, the funders will come through a little bit on this and start really encouraging fair data more strongly even than they're doing now. And I hope the rewards and recognition system will start to flag fair data as being important, and so people will start to see that it's worth the effort. And I hope that we start to have more examples as well from the pilots that we're working on. But I would say towards the right of this graph, you see that it's a lot lower. This is the more difficult, the real stuff. And that's where we're doing a bit lower than perhaps on just the policy and the communication of that policy. So, of course, we don't measure success by that kind of graph that I've made there. But I think how do we measure success is something that could do with more discussion. And the kind of statistics we're collecting at the moment are just numbers of consultations, number of trained researchers, number of DMPs being produced. So these are all things that are expected from our regulations, sort of basic support. We're just starting a pilot, a data monitor pilot with Elsevier to help to see if that will help us to monitor the production of data sets that originate from Leiden. So tracking exactly how many data sets are being produced and shared, and maybe not shared, but made fair at least. And we have some qualitative analysis going on. So we do some satisfaction surveys. We look at what services we are hoping to have, and then do we have them in place. And I think one thing that you can't measure very easily, but it's something we have a feel for in the central in the Centre for Digital Scholarship, is this happiness measure, if you like. Are researchers happy to work with us when we approach them? And I would say at the moment they are. I think part of that is the way we've organised things at Leiden, that we have tried to avoid being this service. It's what I've alluded to before. We try to avoid being a service that just delivers the same things to everyone, but we try to focus on the collaboration with researchers on pilots. And so we can say to people, we're experimenting, we're developing services, we're not providing solutions necessarily, but we're working with you to try and find solutions. And we found that researchers are very happy to collaborate with us at the moment, but this of course comes back to the trust, that if we don't deliver, if those pilots start to seem a waste of time to people, then the trust starts to go down. So just going back to trust now, and I'd like to start finishing up. If we think about the social dynamics within the university, then we have to have trust between the researchers and the support staff, clearly. Also the decision makers at a higher level, to make sure that it is a priority for them, and that they will then support the needs that we have to fund this area, but to make it a priority for the university. We also need trust in the funders, that they support this movement towards fair data, and they need to trust us that we can help carry that out. We also need trust in the technical infrastructure suppliers and developers, that they can provide the tools we need, that their tools work, that they're going to be reliable, that also that they are going to work for the long term. So you know, we're piloting services at the moment, but it's difficult to get researchers to invest time and effort to put their data into these services sometimes, because they say, yeah, it's a pilot. Does that mean in 2 years I'm going to have to move all this data? And sometimes we can't necessarily answer that because we're relying on the supplier to be able to give that guarantee, and they're also piloting their service. So there needs to be different kinds of trust between many different people involved in this whole ecosystem of producing fair data. We need to have rewards in place of some kind, I think. At the moment, again, it's not a priority for researchers to produce fair data if they're not going to be rewarded for that effort. It does take time, and for some of them, it's too much time at the moment. So they're interested, they're willing, but they have other priorities. So unless we also change the rewards, I think, to recognise the work that they're putting in, this is always going to be a barrier. We need to think about integrity, integrity of data, but also research integrity. So balancing the legal and ethical requirements with the need for collaboration and open science, and making sure that the services we can provide to make data fair recognise these different pools for the researcher. We need to have reliability that the people are going to be there, reliability on the systems, and trust that what we're doing won't fall apart within a few years. And we talk about in our regulations making data available for a minimum of 10 years, but of course some projects, they need their data there for much longer, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So we need to make sure that what we're doing now is robust enough to carry their data forward into the future. And again, we need to think about failure and how we accept failure, how we make sure that that's not a bad thing, because it's difficult to work on some of these projects. Maybe they fail because of time, maybe they fail because of the systems, maybe they fail because the people, we don't have the skills we need, or people leave, people change priorities. So we need to be able to accept failure sometimes in these processes and make sure that there's a trust between people, that if failure happens, that nobody's blamed and that we can move on. So I think we can all, I work in a university, but I think even if you're working in a funding agency or a service provider, we can all think about how we develop the trust necessary to move forward, because I think this is something that's holding us back at the moment in moving forwards and producing more fair data. And I like this image that I found. I think it reflects, we're not in Korea, but the RDA, Korea is hosting the RDA plenary this year. So it reflects the Korean flag, that trust is not just about the practical things. So the yin and the yang, it's not about the practical things alone, the showing up on time, getting work done, meeting deadlines, being reliable. That's not enough to develop trust. There's also an emotional aspect to it. Feeling respected, listening, making researchers feel that you've got their priorities on hand, that you're not just testing them with fair data. So building the networking, building bonds with them are also important aspects in working towards fair data. And I say that's where my interest comes from, in the community building and trying to build those kind of connections with people. So I think Kieran already said this, that mentioned it on one of his slides, that social dynamics isn't just this group at RDA. I think lots of us are interested in social dynamics. I mentioned just a few here. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Engaging Researchers with Data Interest Group. We're looking at sharing engagement stories with each other, so examples of how you engage online. Particularly, we've already produced a cookbook with engagement activities a few years ago, but I think there's quite a lot of groups looking at different aspects of this social dynamics of making of data management. So there's a lot going on across RDA, and I think it would be interesting to think about collaborating in different areas on moving forwards with this. And I also wanted to mention that there's a collaboration, I don't know what to call it exactly, knowledge exchange. Some of you are perhaps aware of it. It's a group of European open science infrastructure providers. Across Europe, we sometimes work with the knowledge exchange group to produce reports and do investigative projects. And I heard recently that they are going to start one this year. So I expect it will, that usually things are completed quite quickly, but they're going to look at the reasons why people are not sharing data. So we're all aware that now there are lots of technical solutions in place. You know, we're telling people share your data, but it's still not happening as much as we'd like. So they're going to start looking at the reasons, and I think it would be really interesting to for this group to just keep an eye on the outputs of that investigation and see what comes out of that. So just to finish, I think we've had some small success. We've reached the first base of the mountain. We're on a little peak. We can look down at where we've come from. But at Leiden, we have bigger mountains to climb. And I think as a community supporting data management and fair data, we all have bigger mountains to climb. So there's a lot to do. It's exciting. And I'm interested to hear how you're all doing and what issues you think are holding us back. So thank you. Stop my screen share.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Joan. That was fantastic. Lots to digest in there from what you said. I'd like to open up there for any questions to Joan. Romain, you got your hand up.
Yes. So first, thanks, Joanne, for your great presentation. My remarks, questions, topics are about, okay, we have shared data, but how to increase the sharing? And that is a really important social aspect, because the question is always, oh, you have data here, but what can I do with this data? Not that is preview, that is organized, the visualization, the reanalyzing with other data set, but how can I enrich the data to make more reuse feasible? And that's something that can have a social aspect, enriching data, curating data. And I think that it's a rocket stage that is not really well defined in fair principles, in verification processes, but that could have a really importance in the social aspect of what is the data, is a common a common given, a common thing that we can use in other ways that are in the mind of the producers. That's my 2 cents.
Yes, I think it's a good point, Roman, because we often talk about sharing data, but we don't talk about using other people's data very much. So it's all very focused on pushing data out. Is it there? Has it been shared? But what do we mean by sharing? Yeah, it implies that someone else is using the data, doesn't it? And so it's one thing to just sort of say, there it is, do what you want with it, but who is using it?
And the idea behind that,
how?
yes, the idea behind that is perhaps your data will not be very really perfectly fair by yourself, but another people can add something to make them more fair. That's a community responsibility when you have a linked data, web of data, middle to enrich a system that you are not the source.
Yeah, so are you thinking, are you talking about that enrichment happening by data stewards or other researchers? I'm just wondering how you see that, Roman.
I think everybody is able to enrich data in a way or another. For instance, you talk about rewards, but a reward of a good reuse of data is another aspect than verification rewards.
Yeah, and I exactly. I think this whole rewards discussion is going to get very interesting in the future. I think we're really in very basic stages of rewards. So we haven't really talked about the role that different people play. So that, you know, there are ways to think about different roles, but it's not really been thought through, I think, yet, that many different people can have many different roles, and how you recognize those roles, whether they're worth recognizing. I was just thinking yesterday, you know, my ORCID profile has lots of things that I'm not really proud of. Just the fact that I've edited our data management plan template is in my ORCID account. But, you know, if we start to recognize different people's roles, they're going to have huge lists of things that they've done. It's like a life story. It's not just a CV of publications anymore. It's really like everything you ever do will be recorded and recognized. I'm not sure if we want to go down that route. I don't know, but it means it's going to get very complicated, the rewards and recognitions. And when you start to think about, researchers as well, working on data, not just producing data, but working on it, and the different kinds of roles when it comes to a data set, how do you define the different part, you know, creating the data, sharing the data, working on the data, producing things with the data? How detailed do you want to get in how you recognize people's roles? I think starts to become a really interesting discussion that we're going to need to have at some point when we look at rewards and recognition, because it's kind of going in that direction to really start going into the detail, isn't it? And I know the Dutch funders are very interested in FAIR, and they now, some of those ask in their data management plan that they require from researchers that they fund, they ask, will you be reusing data? And it's a very simple question. And so many researchers stumble on this question, because what does it mean, reusing data? I don't want to start going into the conversations I've had with researchers, but what do we mean by that, reusing data? Just taking some data that somebody else created and using it, or really using it in different ways, analyzing it in different ways, using some data to prove something else. I don't know, it starts to get a very long discussion just about data reuse. So I think, yes, I think it's a really good point you've raised here, Raman. Looking at the use of data is something that's neglected, and there are a lot of social dynamics connected with that. Yeah. Perhaps I don't know if anyone else has something they wanted to say about that, or if there's another question, maybe we should that topic.
I think it's a really interesting topic as well. I just wanted to add one little thing to recommend. Was in the virtual research working group earlier today, and one of the things that we're talking about was when you have a research tool, it can do one of the three things to it. It can either preserve the fairness of the data that it's processing. It could either increase it or it could decrease it. And there was discussions around saying we need to insert that into the thinking of people who are building these research tools, saying is a tool actually adding to or decreasing the fairness of the data that comes into it and it puts out on the other side. So I think there are multiple places that you start to think about how that gets used and influenced. But we're running a little bit behind time, so I think we might continue on from here. But thank you, Joanne. It was a really interesting. I had a list of things that I would like to actually follow up on as well, because you raised some really interesting points about communities of practice and aligning the organizations once with the work that's happening and the research and the whole point of partnering with the researchers. I think those are all different, very interesting elements to explore on their own as to sort of synthesizing what you all had done into more repeatable sort of modules that we can start to capture. So thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I hijacked your time a bit, but I hope it's useful for thinking about the questionnaire as well. It
was very, very useful. Thank you. And look at for anybody else, if you've got questions, I'd encourage you to put them on the notes so we can actually capture those and actually either Joanne could answer them there, or we can continue it in a future session to start to unpack some of those ones in more detail. So I'd like to move on to our next session, which is around the survey that we want to do, and we just want to probably, given we're running a little bit short of time, we might more about introducing that rather than working through it all that much. But I'll give a little bit of context by in here. So the background of this is that as part of what we're doing, we sort of wanted to focus in on something that we could have as a tangible thing, because there's all these conversations are very important and very interesting. So we started off with saying, can we kind of mark out a top 10 concerns around social dynamics here? And not saying that it has to be 10, but it's a sort of a, that top 10 thing seems to be a catch thing for us, but a way to focus our attention and minds in there. So we had a couple of sessions to think about this, and the idea is to do a survey of the RDA community, and anchoring our thinking around FAIR and what is it, what are the things that will social dynamics around FAIR. And as we were going through that, it became clear that trust is a key piece. So let's focus it more, narrow it down further onto trust. So that's what we've been sort of working on in the few of the last plenary sessions, or the interest group sessions, and we kind of got somewhere with that, which Crystal will introduce. So we just wanted to show that to you and then get your feedback on this and work that through. So I'll hand it over to Crystal. Take it from here.
Excellent. Thanks, Kieran. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we have a bit of a mirror board activity to do as a group. I'm just going to put the link to this mirror board in chat for everyone. So hopefully you can all access that Miro board, but I'll keep it up here on the screen as well, because it wouldn't be a working group meeting without a Miro board activity, really. So if you prefer with your Miro board, you can turn off the view of other people's cursors by just clicking this little pointer section. So I'm going to turn that view off here so that you don't get motion sickness. So feel free to leave comments anywhere in this Miro board. This is meant to be somewhere where we can be collaboratively working. So feel free to grab a sticky note and leave comments. All right, so I'm just going to bring everybody up to the top. Okay, and we're going to start with a little bit of context setting. Okay, so we're going to start with a little bit of context setting about the survey and the work we've done on that so far. So we have developed a survey template using Qualtrics, and at the moment we've sort of got the first half designed, and now we're into designing the second half of the survey. So we want to show you what we've done for the first half, and then we want your feedback and advice on the second half. And this might be an activity that we carry over to our next community meeting as well. And again, just to remind you, at any point, just grab a sticky note, pop it on, and leave any comments or questions that you might have. We really will benefit from your feedback. So the first page that one has when they enter our survey will be something like this. It's just going to give a bit of context setting. Take this with a grain of salt at the moment, because it will change as the survey develops, but it should give you an idea of the sorts of things we thought we would include in that context setting and overview. The next page in the survey is the streaming questions. So this is just a generic question. This is not a streaming question, but in which country do the participants work? And then depending on the selection that the participant makes here, they'll get streamed into a set of demographic questions. So we won't pause to discuss now, but if you have feedback on these categories of, I guess, participants that we envisage we might get, please do grab one of those yellow sticky notes and pop it on here. But basically, we imagine that the categories might be people who maintain and support data practices, people who generate data, researchers, people who provide the infrastructure, and then we have an other category because there's always going to be something you haven't thought of. And then depending on what people select, they'll be sent over to these demographic questions, which are, we've tried to keep quite brief because we want to get people into the meat of the survey. And we won't look at these in any detail now, but again, leave a comment if you've got one. They're all pretty much similar with just tweaks to the wording, so it makes more sense for that person's context. I guess with the exception of infrastructure provider, because they maybe have a very different perspective to, say, the researcher, for example. After that, the participant is sent back to like the same stream. Everyone goes back into the same stream. We'll have a bit more context setting and information around what the participant can expect to come next in the survey. And then this is where we're at now. This brings us to today. So not the rest of the time in our session, but maybe for the next 10 minutes, because I do want to leave some time for Kieran to wrap up and flag what's coming next for the interest group. We'd like to talk you through how we imagine bringing together the questions for the second half of the survey. So developing the next set of questions for the survey. So the aim of what we're about to talk about now is to co-design a couple of questions together, maybe time permitting, we'll see how we go. Just a reminder that the survey goal is for us to understand the social drivers behind data sharing. And so the key themes we want to examine in the survey are fair and trust. And Joanne did a really excellent job of outlining both these things and talking about how they lock in together as well. So fair, of course, we're defining in terms of findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Now trust, that we know that there are many ways to define trust, many models for trust. And so we are not at all suggesting the one we're choosing is the only way to think about trust, but it's one that Kieran and I have found helpful in our discussions. And so it comes from the Designing Trustworthy Data Institutions resource, which is linked out here in the Miro board as well. Feel free to click on that link. And it contains 4 components that we're going to talk about in a moment. The format of the questions that we want to develop are text response questions. So we want people to sort of share stories or experiences. Where we're aiming to not give sort of a word limit count, give 250 words, for example. Rather, we're hoping that we're just sort of leaving an open-ended text response. It might prompt people to provide a response that is as long as they feel as is appropriate. So what next? So the 4 components of trust that are outlined in the trust framework presented in that document. For each of those components, we want to develop maybe 1 or 2 questions to try and interrogate why people do or don't share data. And we want to frame this data sharing around FAIR principles, because as was just talked about, FAIR is, a slightly different conceptualization to data sharing in general as well, right? So, but we want to try and keep that focused on the FAIR principles as much as possible. I'll just zoom out to give a bit more context. Before we launch into talking about these 4 components and doing a quick mirror board activity together, does anyone have any comments or questions, or perhaps do people know this particular resource, the Designing Trustworthy Data Institutions, in great detail, and might like to speak to that before we move on? I'll just give a few, like 20 seconds of Zoom silence. Okay, I can't see anything coming through in the chat, so I'm going to move on. All right, so what you see in these purple boxes are the 4 components of trust that we've pulled from the resource. So ability, willingness, and motivation, context, audience, and action, behaviors, and claims and commitments. So that's what we've got along the columns. And then along the rows are the specific things that we'd really benefit from you as a community, your feedback on. So we're just going to step through, probably we'll just have time for the first one, but we're going to step through these 3 sort of questions. So do you have an example yourself of seeing this component of trust in action in your own role? Then we're going to look at how this component of trust relates to data sharing. And is there something specific about FAIR that this component of trust relates to? And then finally, once we've sort of thought through those things, we really want to see if you have any suggestions for ways we might actually phrase a question around this component of trust and FAIR. So I'm going to zoom in now on ability, willingness, and motivation. Feel free to read the text, but the cliff notes are here, as we've interpreted them anyway, that these components relate to the following things. So ability is about an individual or a group's access to the technology, the resources, and the funding. Willingness is sort of data sharing, being part of a group or an individual's vision or mission. And motivation being the positive or negative, or the intrinsic and extrinsic motivators that play into somebody actually going ahead and sharing their data, or actually going ahead and making their data fair. So we might start with this first one, and just as a starting point, I've given an example here, but I'd invite you to grab a sticky note, pull it over, and type in your own example if you can think of any. But just we'd be really interested to know if you have an example of seeing this component of trust in action in your role. And when I was reflecting on this, I recalled that in a previous job that I worked in, which was an institutional data repository, people tended not to reuse. And actually, it was really interesting. I made a note here, the difference between the motivators between getting people to share data versus getting people to then actually reuse that data that's shared. So people tended not to actually reuse our data because although our repository was willing and motivated to make the data shareable, we didn't actually have the funds, so we didn't actually have the ability to quality control that data that was deposited in the repository. So I think there was a sense of people who might reuse that data, not necessarily trusting the integrity or the quality of that data. So if you had any experiences in this, that sort of were in this vein, be really interested in hearing about them, either via a sticky note on the Miro, or feel free to just unmute and speak up. I'm going to leave a bit of Zoom silence now. I'm not afraid of Zoom silence after 2 years and 3 years of Zoom. Yeah, Raman.
Yeah, just a question. this is open to our participation, right?
About, so your
The Miro middle with all the stickers and things like that you are presenting.
Yep.
Do you want some participation from us?
I do want some participation from you, Raman. Yeah. So
Yes.
if you, I mean, but do feel free to just speak. You've got the microphone if you have an example.
No, it's just to
clarify.
To take the link and to put it in French pad notes because I think that it will interest some people.
Oh yeah, for sure. Feel free to share this Miro link widely, Raman, and I've just put it back into I've just put the link into chat again. But go for it.
Thank you.
The more feedback, the better. The more feedback, the better on this. So how long will the survey stay open to answers? So we haven't launched the survey yet. How long will we be doing this activity for to decide on the questions? I guess really as long as it takes, hey, Kieran, like we're not in any rush. So if you want to take a couple of weeks or wait to your next community meeting of your interest group and share this, let us know. I think we'd be happy to do that. What do you think, Kieran?
Yeah, I think it's sensible to leave this Miro board open. I think what we want to do is to use this to start to formulate a questionnaire, the survey we can pull together and distribute. So we'll start to continue to work on the survey, and we'll keep posting it onto the interest group mailing list, as well as in the sessions that we'll have in the future. But we do the Miro board. I think it's be useful to keep it open, and if people want to continue to add to that, it becomes a really good resource.
Yeah, and especially because I think this is a really complex thing to try and tease out in one's own mind as well. Yeah, so Unga has their hand raised. Please go ahead.
I think this is a really interesting activity. I have two examples come to mind, but it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I can't think clearly enough to phrase them. I'm sorry. But picking up on two of these points in terms of access to technology and resources, I know one institution we work with and they do have a repository, but they don't have specific resources to connect the repository to the researchers. So, and there everything falls down. There's a technological gap, somewhere between technology funding and people. And the other is more in terms of motivation, which is an activity we're doing in the Helmholtz Metadata collaboration on electron microscopy glossary. And there we can give the technology resources. We can't pay people to join, but we can do the organization work with funding for this. And what's interesting is the problem is really trying to motivate people to show up regularly. And there's a network effect that we really didn't expect when we started the activity. Actually, the main reason people show up is not because they care about the glossary necessarily, but because they like seeing each other, meeting new people, or it gives them new links for their research. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
No, I think that's definitely really helpful, and I think it also speaks to the depth and complexity that we could go into in even just one element of these elements of trust. And I see people are popping over and adding some other comments into the other elements, which is fantastic. But I think that really does help us understand that maybe a way forward for the first steps of this survey, and after all, this is just the first steps. This is just us getting a foothold in this work, might be to just focus in on this one element. So that's very helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I invite you to bookmark the link, share it amongst your colleagues and your interest groups. continue thinking through maybe some of these concepts and contributing to the Miro board, I'm going to hand back to Kieran, who's going to wrap up the session for us today. And yes, thank you very much for that discussion thus far. A good teaser for our next community meeting, perhaps.
Thanks, Crystal. Look, I think it's probably worth us, Crystal, so given that some people, it's very late for some people as well, and we have limited time here, maybe we can email out the Miro link to after this session. Look, in terms of wrapping up, really, it's what I wanted to really say is, this is a piece of work that we want to continue doing. We'll keep the Miro board open, and we'll send everyone a link to that via email if you put your name up on the notes there. So you can continue to add to that. Feel free to distribute it to any of your colleagues and others who you think might be able to contribute to that. What we'll want to do is then start to synthesize that into that set of questions, into the survey. And what we'll look to have 1 or 2 more sessions between now and the next plenary to try and work on that survey, and hopefully by the next plenary we'll be able to circulate the survey before that, so we can use that as a discussion for the next plenary, plenary 20. Yeah, so that's the main plan from what we want to do. Please join the interest group if you haven't done so already, and we are always also on the lookout for another couple of co-chairs. So if you're interested, please let me or Crystal know. So with that, thank you all for your participation. It's been a fantastic session, and if you have any questions, can feel free to drop either of us an email or put it in the notes, and we'll use that as a means for communicating. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, Crystal. That was a really great session.
Thank you.
I think that there are lots of work to do in your interest group space. So clap, clap.
Sorry, I did want to really say thank you very much for Joanne for coming and joining in person, because it's middle of the night there. Thank you for making a huge effort.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kieran and Crystal. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time with the Miro board, but it's also, I think we need time to process it. So it's given a good insight into where you're going. So I'm sure everyone's going to have a look at that afterwards.
It's always tricky with these sessions because sometimes you have very few people turning up, because you don't kind of have a gauge of it before walking in. So